Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Christy. I am the marketing manager here at Kids & Company, and we are very excited to provide tips and tricks on language development for children today. We are very fortunate to have Talia Leszcz, speech language pathologist from Babbly, as one of our facilitators today. She will provide an overview of child language development and how parents can support it at home. Together with Maryam Nabavi, co-founder of Babbly, they will discuss the importance of tracking language milestones as early as infancy, as it's related to vocabulary size and literacy in preschool years. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We are going to be using the chat function for some questions that Talia and Miriam are posing to you guys. So just so that we don't lose any questions in that, please use the Q&A for your questions, and we'll ensure that they get addressed, as many as we can, at the end of the session or when we take breaks in different topics. Over to you, ladies.
Great, thank you for having us. My name is Maryam, and I'm the founder of Babbly. Together with Talia, we are very excited to talk about this really important topic of tracking and promoting your baby's language. So if we go to the next slide, today's agenda will start with a quick introduction about us and the company. I'll hand it over to Talia to talk about communication, what are the different milestones at different ages and stages, how do children learn to communicate, and how you as parents can support your child's language development at home. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session, but throughout this, feel free to post your questions on the Q&A part. So Talia, we're very lucky to have her as a speech language pathology advisor at Babbly. She has extensive experience in the pediatric speech and language development. She has her own practice called Acorn SLP, and she's also the speech language pathologist at George Health Center for Children and Families here in Toronto. I'm one of the founders of a company called Babbly. My bio is far less impressive, but I'm basically a mom to a 4-year-old who was speech delayed himself, and that kind of led me to start this venture. Basically my experience, if we can go to the next slide, and realizing how big this problem is, as you can see on the slide, there are some stats that a lot of parents actually find surprising, but we know that 1 in 10 children get impacted by language development by age of preschool, and a lot of these children don't really get diagnosed or treated, which really impacts their confidence and their ability to communicate, increases tantrums. So looking at that, which might look like a scary thing, but the good news is babbling and tracking babbling at young ages, even at as early as 6 months, can really be one of the strongest predictors of your child's language skills overall, but later on even academic success. So at Babbly, what we do is we have an app. It's a free app both on Android and iOS. You can use it to analyze your baby's voice. You can upload a video of your baby, and our technology will analyze your baby's voice and will give you kind of a breakdown of what stage of babbling your child is at, and we'll give you recommendations on what kind of activities you can play at home to promote their language development. We also offer parent coaching, and Talia is one of the coaches that will work directly with anyone who's interested in either promoting your child's language development now that a lot of us are at home and we have more time with our little ones, or if you're worried, you can also book a consultation with one of our SLPs and get all of those questions answered. With that, I will hand it over to Talia to walk you through the communication stages and ages.
Okay, thanks Miriam, and thanks Christy for the introduction and setting this up. It's great to be here today. So as Miriam mentioned, I'm Talia, I'm a speech pathologist, and today I'm going to go through just some information about how language learning happens, what goes on in the process of language development in young children, and definitely get to some strategies and some ways you can start supporting your children in their development right away. I just, before we get going, wanted to kind of get to know a little bit who's here and why you're here. So Christy, if you don't mind launching that first poll that we put together, just so I can get some information about sort of what ages what kind of ages your children are at right now.
There we go. It should be up for everyone.
So I'll just give you a minute or two to complete that. I think Christy, you'll probably be able to track as answers come
Yep,
in.
I see the answers coming in.
Okay, awesome.
We'll just give it another few seconds. We've got almost everyone's votes.
Yeah, I know we have quite a big group with us today, so when you have a bunch of answers, you can just let me know the ranges of who's here.
Okay, perfect. I'll end it because we're at 95% of participants
okay.
filled it
Amazing.
in.
That was fast. Awesome.
And I'll share them here.
Okay, perfect. So we got a couple of you who have children who are under a year. A good majority that are, in that year to year and a half range, and that 18 months to 2 years, and then a couple of kids who are in the later preschool years and then beyond. Yeah. Okay, amazing. Oh, and you went right to the second poll. I didn't know they were going to come up together. Okay, so some of you are here, most of you are here because you're curious about your child's speech and language skills. You just want more information. Some of you are wondering if your child's on track right now, and some of you are just looking for resources. So that's great. And we will get to a lot of these. We should get to all of these, and be able to kind of meet these interests for you today. And definitely, if not, as Christy mentioned, we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So add your questions in as we go, or feel free to share at the end, and I'll hopefully be able to cover all of those and give you a lot of good information today. So I wanted to start off just by going over like some myths that I hear a lot about. I work with a lot of families of young children, and I get asked these questions a lot. So I always like to just sort of start and clear the air on some of these things. I'm not sure if they're things that any of you have thought or wondered about before, but myth number one: educational products like flashcards and electronic toys stimulate language development. So this is a myth. We know from the research and from all of the work that people in the child development sphere do that interaction is the key to language learning. Children learn to communicate through their daily interactions, their daily routines, their play with their peers, their caregivers, and the primary adults in their lives. So no need to go out and spend a lot of money on any of those fancy toys, because you as parents are really going to be the best people to support your child in their language development. And we'll get to some specifics about that. Do not worry. Myth number two: you should never use baby talk with babies. So baby talk kind of refers to that, simplified, sing-songy kind of language. And actually, you should use that kind of language. When we get into like what goes into language learning, it's a really, really complex process. And if you really, really break it down, it's kind of a miracle that kids can do what they do when it comes to language learning. And so children really do benefit from that child-directed speech, that sort of simplified, slower rate of speech where you vary your pitch and your intonation so that you're really highlighting a keyword. The key here: simplify your language, but keep it grammatically correct. So try to avoid things like "me want juice." It's "I want juice." So you're always modeling the correct grammar. And I find this happens a lot with pronouns. We do a lot of like "mommy's turn," "John wants it." So just make sure that you're always modeling the grammatically correct language structure. "I want it," "your turn," "you're doing a good job," those kinds of things, because we want our children to get exposed to really good language models, and that's how they're going to learn those kinds of more complex grammatical skills. This is one I hear a lot: "My child won't say the words they know. They must be lazy." I promise you, kids are not lazy when it comes to talking. Talking is hard. And if they're not doing it, or they're not saying the words that you've heard them say before, and they're not saying it when you want them to say it, there's probably something else at play. And it's not a laziness, because if they could just say the word, they would get what they wanted so much faster. So they will always kind of default to the most efficient way of communicating. So I promise you, little kids aren't lazy. And then another myth that I hear a lot, and I'm wondering if this is maybe a question anyone came to with today, bilingualism will cause a language delay. Absolutely not. Over and over and over again, the research shows that monolingual and bilingual children reach their language milestones at the same time. Learning more than one language does not cause a delay. And in fact, research is showing that bilingualism provides many cognitive benefits. And there's actually some really, really beneficial things that happen in development for people who are bilingual. So definitely, if you speak more than one language at home, keep speaking more than one language at home. The key takeaway when it comes to learning more than one language is that you, as the caregivers and as the parents, are modeling or being the best language model. So you're speaking in a language that you're the most comfortable in, that you're the strongest in, so that you'll be the best teacher for your child. So if there are any other myths that anyone's thinking about right now that you're like really wondering about, you can definitely add them into the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation for sure. Okay, so why are we here today? So I know Maryam kind of introduced the app a little bit to you, and we're going to get into sort of child language development. We know that a child's early experiences, particularly that like very, very early life, that 0 to 5, birth to 5, really provides the foundation and the building blocks for a child's future. These early experiences that your child has with you, with their peers in daycare, they impact educational achievement, they impact their capacity to build meaningful relationships later on, they impact their emotional and mental well-being. So these early years are really, really foundational, and it's no surprise that it's the most important time to build strong language skills. We know that healthy development in these early years sets your child up for success and literally shapes the way the brain develops. Children build more neural connections in the first few years of their life than they do in the rest of their life. In fact, we know that more than 1 million new neural connections form every second in a child's brain in those first few years of life. So there is rapid and tremendous brain development happening. So we know these early experiences matter. And we know that if there's a delay or if there's something going on, that early intervention across all domains of child development is so, so critical to a child's success. So we want to be able to know, is our child developing well? What can we do to support them and to make sure that we're really, really making the most out of these tremendously important early years? So we're going to talk a bit about milestones as we go through today. And a milestone is really just, it refers to the expected order of skill acquisition. What we typically expect a child to do. This thing is going to come before this thing. Like most often, a child's going to pull to stand and cruise before they start to walk. So those are just different milestones that the child's going to go through. And there are a lot of checklists out there that you can use to kind of check, is my child meeting developmental milestones? Are they progressing in the expected way? But what we know about milestone checklists is that they're kind of like a moment in time. And different checklists are missing different skills. There's not a lot of consistency in the well-used milestone checklists that are out there right now. And we know that there's a lot of variability in child development. Every child is unique. And yes, there's a sort of expected order of progression, but really every child's going to come to each of those milestones on their own and in their own way. And ultimately, skill acquisition, learning to do something, it's not like turning on a switch. It's not like today your child doesn't talk and tomorrow your child talks. There's a lot of overlapping skills that over time develop. There's this gradual progression of skill development. So you want to monitor your child's development. You want to be able to know that you're supporting them in the best way possible. And what's great about Babbly is that it's so much more than a milestone checklist, because it really allows you to track your child's development over time. And not only can you track it over time so that you can see if these really significant predictors of later success, like babbling and like gesture use, are there, but you can also get really personalized, customized, evidence-based strategies to support them. And you know that it's a really trustworthy source of information. So I'll pause here for a minute. I don't know if there's any questions that have come in related to kind of what I've been saying so far.
Yeah, so we do have some questions that have come in, and I don't know if you're going to get more in depth on some of these topics later. But, there's a few from bilingual families.
Okay.
Are we going to chat more about that after?
Let's get into that now. We can talk about bilingualism now.
Okay. Perfect. So the first question is, we speak 3 languages at home. Sometimes one phrase has 3 different languages associated in the same phrase. My daughter is 27 months old and she speaks more English. She understands the 2 other languages, but she doesn't want to reply necessarily in the same language that we've asked the question in. Any advice?
Okay, so I hear this all the time, and I think it's also so common. It's not like bilingualism is this like neat little package where you speak this language and this language in equal amounts. Every family is going to use all of their languages in different ways, and it's so common to get like phrases where you have kind of 2 or 3 different languages in that phrase, because that's ultimately what your home language is. Keep talking to your child in the languages that you want them to learn in your home language, so that you're exposing them to those languages. Ultimately, we live in Toronto. I think everyone here lives in Toronto.
Across Canada.
Across Canada. Okay, so we live in Canada. English is kind of the dominant language here. When you leave the house, when you watch TV, when you interact with people outside of your home, your child's getting exposed to English. So it's really, really common for them to sort of default to English, as you know, answering questions in English. All I would say is keep modeling, and if you really want more practice in what your home languages are, then kind of double down on their use, and even maybe try to be a bit more conscientious about using your home languages a little bit more, because you know they're going to learn English. Kids are going to learn English in school and preschool and all those things that they do outside the home. So your home time can really be your opportunity to emphasize the languages that you want your child to be learning.
Perfect.
And
then we have a question on whether they should be concerned about a 3-year-old who is stuttering.
Okay, so I will actually touch on this a little bit later on when I get into the different kind of aspects of communication. So I'm going to pause on that question. And Christy, if I forget, could you remind me about that one when we get to the Q&A at the end?
Absolutely, absolutely. Awesome. And then our last one is sort of on the concept of the myths. So I have 4 children and always hear younger siblings won't develop language as quickly because older children talk for them or help them so quickly they don't need to ask for things. Is that true? And if so, how should they be trying to manage that?
Okay, so yes, this is a great question. I hear this one a lot. This is definitely one of those myths about language development. Older siblings are not going to slow down the development of a younger sibling. They might not be getting as many opportunities to show you what they're capable of because they have these 3 older siblings that maybe are louder and talking more already and doing a lot more for them. So I would say it's hard, you have 4 kids, but doing the best you can to give the youngest child or, each of the children a little bit of individualized time, even if it's just like while you're getting them dressed or while you're buckling their car seat up. A few minutes a day sprinkled throughout the day of really individualized attention. And I'll get into some specifics at the end of what you can do to kind of just make sure you're maximizing their opportunities for learning, I think can help. But also that, if they're meeting their milestones and it seems like things are progressing, even if you're not hearing them speak as much as their siblings, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a delay there. But to look at each child for sure individually, and we'll get into the milestones. So hopefully I'll give you some more specific information about that. Okay, I'm going to move along, but I'll keep pausing. And if there's questions that are related to what I just spoke about, answer them. And if they're sort of related to things I'm going to cover, I'll get to it in the Q&A. And I will make sure to save. We're going to 1:30, right, Christy? In an hour?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure to save quite a bit of time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so before we talk about language development, we really need to talk about communication, because communication is sort of like the defining aspect of language. Without communication, we don't really have language. And so this is a process that starts, this process of communication development starts in young children like a long time before their first word is ever spoken. So I know that most of you who are here have kids who are over 18 months. So many of you have kids who've already spoken their first word, but I'm going to get into what goes into kind of even being able to use that first word, learn that first word, and beyond. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment and think about a message that you sent today. Maybe an email, maybe a text message, maybe a conversation you had, and just think for a second, and just I'll pause for a second so you can just pull that into your mind. And I want you to think about the content of that message, what it was, why you sent it, and how you sent it. And if anyone wants to kind of volunteer an example or two into the chat of something, a message you sent, how you sent it, and why. So I'm not sure if anything's going into the chat there.
We have one response
Awesome.
here. Someone sent an email to their manager today to confirm if he was attending a meeting.
Okay, amazing example. So your message was to, you were telling your boss, you were confirming your attendance. So you were sending a message to your boss, you were sharing information that they needed to have, and you did it by email. That was your method. So like I said, language is just one part of communication. When we talk about child language development, we really need to be talking about their communication development. And so in your example of sending an email, you communicated something, but you didn't say anything. It was through typing, it was through text. And so communication is this exchange of information, of ideas, of desires that happens between people. It's not necessarily spoken language. And I think that I'm really going to kind of draw at this idea because so often when parents are wondering about their child's language development, you're thinking about the words, you're thinking about the spoken language, but there's so much more that's going to go into that. And I'm going to get into that in quite a bit of detail now. Okay, so what are some of the ways that your child communicates? So you just told me that you sent an email. That's one of the ways that you communicate, but what are some of the ways that your child communicates? So I listed a bunch of examples there. Your child might communicate with you by looking at you, by smiling at you, by looking back and forth between you and something that excited them. They might point to a picture and get really excited about it, and that's how they communicate. Gesture, they might sign, they might make a sound, they might scream or cry. I'm sure that might be something you hear a lot. You might hear a word approximation or a real word, phrase, sentence, or story. If there's any examples of how your child communicates that I didn't touch on, like feel free to definitely add those into the chat right now. So there's many different methods of communication. And again, some of these are spoken, but not all of them are. And so we really want to look at, this whole process of how how children communicate. Chrissy, if anyone
we do have a few other ones. So dragging by the hand, shy smile or speaking, or sometimes getting angry and throwing stuff on me.
Yes. Oh, those are great examples. I should add those to my list. Throwing things, temper tantrums, those are all really, your child is sending you a message. They are telling you something, even if they're not using their words to do it. So yes, thank you for adding those examples, and those are great. Okay, and then we want to think about the why. What is the purpose of communication? In the example that one of the parents shared at the beginning, they had to tell their manager that they were going to be attending the meeting. So they were sharing information. But your kids are going to communicate, and we all communicate for many different reasons. And so some of those might be to label something, right? Looking at the picture book, I'm going to see the picture of the ball and I'm going to say ball and labeling it. dragging you maybe to the kitchen to get the cup that's on the counter that they can't reach to get help, or bringing you over to the TV to turn it on, to ask for an object or a thing, to answer a question. So when I'm putting it out there and you guys are typing back your responses, that's one of the, you're communicating for the reason of answering my question. So you might ask your children questions and they might answer you by showing you with their body that they're answering. They might not answer necessarily with words. They might ask a question. That's another reason that we communicate, to greet, to protest or refuse, comment and share ideas. So this list is not exhaustive. There are many, many reasons that we communicate and that your child might communicate. But again, why are we talking about this? It's because we can't talk about language development without talking about communication. And in communication, we're going to have this back and forth exchange for many different reasons and in many different ways. And so we want to look, when we're looking at child language development, does this child communicate for many different reasons and in many different ways before we can even get into, are they meeting their language milestones? And so these are things that milestone checklists can sometimes miss, and the Babbly app can offer you a better way to kind of monitor these kinds of skills, because they're a little bit more complex and they're a little bit more abstract sometimes. So language development, as I've said many times, and will continue to say many more times, is only one part or one aspect of communication. And I know many of you said you're here because you're curious about how to support your children. You want to know what the best way to be supporting your child in their language development is right now. If we want to be successful in supporting language development, we really need to work across all these aspects. And I'm going to briefly touch on what each of these aspects are. But like I said, we have receptive language and expressive language. That's what you're thinking of when you think of language. And that's only one little part of the whole picture of communication. So I'm going to start by asking a question and type it into the chat. And then Christy, once there's a couple of answers in there, just share them with me. When would you say language learning begins? When would you say a child is starting to use language?
We have when they're tired. So
okay. So sorry, let me rephrase the question, because I want you to think like developmentally. When do you think this process of language learning starts?
Six months, 4 months, 4 to 6 months.
Okay.
In the womb.
In the womb. Love it. Okay.
Since day one.
Since day one, yes. Yes, exactly. 4 to 6 months is spot on, because so much about language development happens in that 4 to 6 month range and beyond, obviously. But yes, language learning really does ultimately start in the womb. And how, you might be wondering, well, I will get into that. So social communication, one of the aspects of language. And I'm so happy that all of the people who answered that question I asked knew that it was before that first word happens. Language learning happens well before that first word comes. And what we do see more and more, the research is miraculously able to tell us now, is that it really starts in the womb, and that newborns are actually born with auditory and visual capacities that promote social interaction. And language is learned through interaction. So these foundational skills for communication and for language development, they're present. Actually, we know that like functional hearing skills are pretty well developed at 20 weeks post-conception. So just about at, halfway through the pregnancy, a baby can hear pretty well. And right at that stage, their hearing is tuned to work best when they hear like the frequency range of the human voice. They're literally wired to prefer to hear human voices over other sounds. And in particular, we know that babies respond and prefer to listen to their own mother's voice more than the voice of another woman, because that's like the main sound that they hear throughout the pregnancy and that early part of life. And remember that all of the sounds they're hearing are muffled by all that amniotic fluid and all that the mother's body that they're in, but the mother's voice transfers to the womb best. And so babies are really, really tuned into that, and will seek that out above other sounds when they're born. The visual system, unlike the auditory system, unlike hearing, so sight, develops more so after birth. It's pretty immature in newborn babies. They can't really see that clearly or see that far. But what they can do is discriminate faces. And actually, from birth, their eyes will start to focus best at about 6 to 12 inches from their face, which is pretty commonly like where mom and dad are. That's where we are when we're talking to babies. So our child's like biology and physiology is really wired. We are wired for human interaction and for communication. And so that language learning process, it really does start in the womb. And it starts with this aspect of social communication. And you can think about social communication as like the reason that we communicate, the purpose, the motivation. And children must be really socially motivated to learn language, because language is learned through interaction. We know that good communication skills have their roots in social interactions between parents and caregivers during everyday activities. So your day, your routine, the things you're already doing are the best places to be supporting and promoting language development in your young children. And in particular, we know that one of the most essential experiences in shaping their developing brains is this, what we call the serve and return interaction between children and the significant adults in their lives. So that back and forth, your baby, your 4-month-old baby makes a sound and you look at them and respond to them as if they just said something to you. They served that sound to you and you returned with a comment or a look or a smile. And it's that back and forth interaction from birth up through toddlerhood into school age that really forms the brain and really has such an impact on the brain development. So these social communication skills, the social interaction, sets the foundation for language learning. It helps the child learn language, and in particular, it helps the child learn to use that language functionally. And what I mean by learning language versus using language is, like, I see a lot in my practice, a child who comes in with a big vocabulary, but when they want to ask mom for something or ask dad for something, they can't use that word. So while they have that word in their vocabulary, and if you show them that flashcard, that fancy educational tool picture of milk, they can say milk, or they can see that that's milk. But when they want milk, they can't necessarily ask for it. So we really want to make sure that kids are learning through this strong foundation of social communication skills, language, and also how to use it functionally. And just I'm going to quickly go over some of the milestones and some of the markers that you can be looking at in kids at different ages. But so we see this preference for the human voice and face as early as 2 weeks. We can assess that. We see turn taking start as early as 3 months. So that's where if a caregiver talks to a 3-month-old, that 3-month-old is going to vocalize and make noises in return. So there's already this sort of like mini little conversation that's happening between parent and baby when the baby's only 3 months old. And that is a long time before that first word comes in. We also know that babbling around 5 months, when the infant can finally sort of control the oral mechanism, they change the way they babble to get people's attention. They know already at 5 months that the way they make noises and the noises they make is going to get mom or dad's attention differently. And then some really important ones, I'm going to point them out here and I'm going to point them out again, is joint attention and pointing. And these are really purely social skills. Joint attention is this idea where your baby sees something that they like, or your child, and they look at it, and then they look at you, and they look back at that object. So there's this triangle of gaze. They want to make sure that you're looking at this amazing thing that they're looking at, and they're thinking about what you are thinking about. And that has to be in place really before intentional language use is gonna develop. And pointing is a similar thing, right? I point, I'm not just pointing, I'm pointing and I'm checking that you see what I'm pointing at, so you know what I want, or you know what I'm telling you about. So these skills really reflect a real desire to connect with people. By 6 months, like I said, we're going to see children starting to try to make eye contact. Children will be more likely to stop crying when they're spoken to. Like I said, they're going to babble to gain attention and request. And you're going to start to get that like mini conversation, that back and forth noises, turn taking though, which sets the stage for back and forth conversations later on. By 12 months, we see kids starting to imitate. At 9 months, we see them following the point. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna like blow through the milestones because I know that the families here have kids across the ages. So if there's something specific that I didn't get to, definitely put that into the Q&A and I can kind of hone in on a certain milestone or a certain skill that maybe we didn't get to. We start to see kids use a lot more gestures. That joint attention begins to develop. Social referencing. So this is the idea where, you know, a child sees something and they want to kind of just social reference, what's dad thinking about this? This stranger just walked into my home. Is this okay? I'm gonna look and I'm gonna see what dad's reaction is. If dad's happy, I'm gonna be happy. If dad looks scared, I'm gonna be scared. So I'm thinking about what my parents and my caregivers are thinking about. And this is really by already a 1-year-old can do these things. And then participating in turn-taking games. So like peekaboo and, you know, any little silly back and forth routine games that you have in your home. By 2 years, we start to see parallel play with peers. So they're playing next to them. The kids might not necessarily be playing together, but this child is paying attention to what this child's doing. He's just maybe doing the same thing right next to him. So it's awareness of their peer. They're just not quite ready yet to engage. Maybe a little bit, depends on the child for sure, but we really want to see by 2 years that side-by-side play. We're going to see more turn taking. Now it's going to become more verbal because by 2, kids should have quite a robust vocabulary. We're going to definitely see more advanced joint attention skills and an emerging awareness of what other people are thinking and other people are feeling. So just kind of knowing, I think mommy's mad right now. Or I think, you know, the teacher's very upset. The teacher's having a really good time. She's laughing a lot. So just an early emerging awareness. By 3, we see improved perspective taking skills. So more awareness of what other people are thinking. Starting to understand that you might think something that's different than what I think. And you may know something that's different than what I know. So these more advanced, what we call theory of mind skills, that understanding of what's going on in your mind. And we start to see kids using language, you know, to tease or make jokes or make believe. And this is just advanced cognitive skills, advanced social communication skills. And then by 4 years and older, that theory of mind continues to develop, but can take a long time to master. Improved ability to express emotions, starting to use their language now for complex purposes to resolve a conflict. 2 kids are fighting over a toy at daycare. Now the child's going to be able to say, you know, I think you need to wait your turn, or that was mine. Let's talk about this, or let's go get the teacher to help us. Whereas a 2-year-old doesn't understand necessarily, if you want it, you're playing with the truck, but I want the truck. How could we want the same thing? That's not possible. You should know what I want automatically, and so I should just get that truck. And so they're just going to maybe go and grab that toy. So these social language skills really develop from birth and up through elementary and even into the teens. Receptive language. So this is what we talk about when we think about language understanding, right? The input. Is your child understanding and processing the things that you're saying to them? And this includes verbal and visual. So later on, as your child starts to learn to read, that's their understanding. Can they understand the words that they read? Do they understand a gesture when you wave? Do they know that that means hi or bye? And this sort of starts with young kids as just, you got to respond when you're spoken to. That's how it starts. As kids develop, then they are able to really understand and follow a routine, or they know after breakfast, I know mom's going to leave for work. I've seen this happen. I know what's coming. And so I'm not going to be so shocked when suddenly breakfast is over and mom's putting her shoes on. I know, I understand the routine. And kids really need to understand routines and sequences of events before they're going to follow more complex directions, or understand when you try to like reason with them and things like that. we'll see following simple directions, and then that gets more complex. So like an 18-month-old might follow, go get your shoes. But by 2.5, 3, they should be able to follow this. Get your shoes, your red coat, and bag, and wait by the door. So the instructions you're giving them, the directions you're giving them are getting more and more complex. Start to see kids answer questions. So really, you're not going to see a child start to answer a question until like 2, 2.5. That's really when we start to see, where is the ball? And they go and they get that ball. They might not tell you the ball rolled under the couch, but when you say, where is the ball? They're going to go and find that ball for you. So they're going to show you that they understand it. And then those questions can get more and more complex. Like, what do we do when it's cold out? Why do you think the boy was crying? What should we do tomorrow after we finish swimming lessons? Those questions are more abstract than where is the ball? Where are your shoes? What is this? And then later that goes into kind of understanding stories and understanding figurative language, like multiple words that have more than one meaning, jokes, those kinds of things. So we start always from simple and we go to complex. And I'm going to pause here because I haven't paused in a while and just see if there's questions related to what I'm talking about now or anything that we can save for the end, Christy.
Yeah, we have a few questions. So the first one is, we have a 21-month-old and he has not started talking yet at all. He babbles and can understand us, but is not using any words. We use English as our main language, but one of us speaks another language on and off. Should we be concerned that he's not talking yet?
Okay, good question. I'm going to get to expressive language next, which is what we expect output-wise from a child. So far I would say, and I will get in as much detail as I can for each individual kind of concern. But we want to remember all these aspects of communication. So not just their output. You said that they understand everything. How about their social interaction? How do they respond to you? Do they like to play with you? Do they interact with you? So I encourage you to think across all of these aspects of communication. And the more of these aspects that seem to be falling into place and developing well, the less concerned that I would be. But I will get into some more specifics about expressive language milestones on the next slide, actually. So yeah, Christy, I think maybe we'll hold off on questions until the end, because I think a lot of the questions are going to be across sort of a lot of the slides.
Yeah, let's get into that and then we'll circle back to them.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Okay. Oops. So expressive language, output. This is not necessarily spoken, sorry. It's any output that the child does. So it could be speech, it could be words, it could be signs. So maybe you've taught your baby some baby signs at home. Maybe your baby has come up with their own gestures that they like to use. So more is a really common one, or eat. Maybe they use pictures, like they really want that ball and they go and they get their book with the picture of the ball on it and they show you. And that's how they're telling you what they want. There's output there. They're sending you a message. It could be with a sound, ba, when they mean ball. It could be with a word. It could be with a sentence, and it could be with a story. So in that question that Christy just brought up of the 21-month-old, I would say, okay, well, out of all these aspects, are there some that your child is doing already, even if there's not a lot of words yet? And that can help also give us information about, is this something we should be concerned about? Because like I said, learning language, it's not a switch. It's not like one day your child's just going to start to speak. Are all of the skills that go into language learning coming in a way that we expect? And I'm going to put these oral language milestones, so these verbal milestones in, because I know that everybody always wonders about them. First word, generally 12 months, but really we're seeing more and more 14 months is more realistic for that first word. By 18 months, we'll see a range of 15 to 50. So pretty big range. And this is again why like those milestone checklists, they're not always that helpful, because a child with 5 words at 18 months who's doing all these other things, I'm much less concerned about than the child who's 18 months with 50 words, but not interacting with their parents at all. So we want to see development moving along across all of these domains of language development. By 2 years, We typically see a range of about 50 to 300. So again, huge range. And again, this is just spoken. This is just words. And I'm going to go into gestures on the next slide, but gestures, they're words. Kids use them like words. So if your child's not using a lot of spoken language, pay attention to how many gestures they're using and how effective they are at getting their messages across to you, even without the spoken word. And then another aspect of expressive language development is like grammar skills. So once your child starts using more words, then we want to see, okay, are their sentences getting more complex? Are they combining words together? We want to start to see simple pronouns like me and mine, around 2.5. Kids should have those. He and she come in a little bit later, like maybe closer to like 30 months, 32 months. Verb tenses. So that's adding complexity to their language. It's not just me go, it's I'm going. And that ing, that present progressive, and this is specific, very specific to English. Different languages have different kinds of grammatical rules and can progress at different rates. In English, ing, present progressive, around 2 years, we want to see that. And by 3 years, we want to see past tense coming in. I walked, we went, regular and irregular. Not perfect. Kids are going to make mistakes. They're going to overgeneralize rules and they're going to undergeneralize rules. So you're going to start to see, okay, now they're using ed to indicate past tense on everything. So now it's I goed and I aided or I eated. So they're going to overgeneralize that rule, and that is normal, that is common, that is part of the process. But there's a lot of milestones out there. There's a lot to look for, and Babbly does a really good job of tracking all of these things and giving you insight into like, is this something I need to be concerned about, or are all the other milestones being met and we're moving on the right track? So gestures. I put gestures here as part of expressive language, but they really are one of this aspect that overlaps so much with the social development, because gestures are really social primarily. Sometimes we'll use gestures just to get what I want, to request something, but they're more often to kind of communicate for many different reasons. A general big milestone, and this will apply obviously to the parents of more of the younger kids. We want to see 16 gestures by 16 months. And between 9 and 16 months, children should be learning about 2 new gestures every month. So a lot of gesture development, and I actually put more emphasis, more weight on gesture use than I would on spoken language in young children, because we know research shows that the development of gestures is the biggest predictor of language development later on. So we really want to be paying good attention to the kinds of gestures a child uses. And I put some examples on here, not exhaustive, but just to give you an idea of like what gestures are, because often I ask parents, does your child use gestures? And it's, you probably haven't thought about it that much because they happen in such a natural way. But we want to see things like giving you a toy, reaching, raising their arms to be picked up, waving, pointing, clapping, or question hands. That's a really fun one for kind of later age infants, toddlers. Nodding head, no and yes. Those are things that are really, really important skills. And just, I'm going to circle back to that question, Christy, that you brought up last, just because it's in my mind. I would say to you, should you be concerned? Well, think about the gesture use. Do you see a lot of gestures? Do you see your child kind of using gestures almost more often to get their messages across? That's a really good sign. That's good. We want that. So these, should I be concerned questions are often never a black and white yes or no. There's a lot of complexity to it. And that's, again, why the milestone checklist, like, they don't really do enough to give you that information. The next aspect of speech development is of language development, or of communication, is speech. This is just verbal. This is only spoken. This is just the output that comes out of your mouth. And this is knowing the different sounds in your language, hearing the different sounds in your language, and producing the different sounds in your language. So some of the other words that you might think of when you think of this concept are articulation, or clarity, and fluency. This is where you sort of think about stuttering. I'm going to do like a really brief blurb on stuttering. Stuttering is, that repetition of sounds or getting stuck on sounds that very, very, very commonly happens to kids as they're learning language. You and I just stuttered, right? And we're not always fluent. We all sort of rephrase and re-say and get stuck on words at different points. But for kids, so much going on there. They're more likely, their motor systems are developing to get stuck on words. So when it comes to stuttering, I always say, like, what kinds of bumps are they having? What kinds of stutters are they having? And sort of, is there family history, or is there other aspects out there that would give you reason to be concerned? And some of those other, repetition of a word, repetition of a phrase, that's sort of within the realm of typical disfluency, typical stuttering. What we would be more concerned about, or we would want to address with a speech therapist, is if your child's really getting stuck. Like they're trying to get those words out, but they just can't get it. Like and you really maybe even see a bit of like tension build up in their face. Those are the ones that interrupts the flow of conversation. That interrupts using your language. So those are the ones that I would recommend speaking to a speech pathologist about. And just a couple of milestones here. As Maryam mentioned, babbling is such a good predictor of language success later on, because all children babble. Even the research shows that children who do not hear, children who are deaf, will still babble noisily with their mouth until about 6 to 8 months. Then they might start to switch to hand babbling, depending on what they're exposed to and things like that. But babbling there's a really typical progression. And I'd say of all of these aspects, speech is the one that we can really rely on our milestones the most. So typically the progression happens as the motor system, the mouth, the teeth, the tongue, all these articulators, we get more control over them and we get more experience using them. So children will go from that like gooing and cooing when they're really young babies. That's all they can really control. As 4 to 6 months approaches, they can start to make more noises, control those sounds a bit more. Then they're going to get into this repetitive babbling around like 8 months, ba, 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 da, 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 ma, ma, ma. That's the canonical babbling. And then variegated babbling, where the way that they babble is starting to sound more and more like language, just it's nonsense. They're not really, we can't parse meaning out of it unless we do our best to infer what the child's looking at or gesturing towards, and what their social communication skills are really telling us. As children get older, they become more clear, because as their articulators, they get more control over their mouth and their teeth and their tongue, they get better at saying their sounds and saying their words. So at 2 years, rule of thumb, a child should be about 50% clear. By 3 years, that moves up to 75%, 4 years to 90%. So even a 4-year-old's not going to be super, super clear all of the time. About 90% of the time they will be. We also see a progression of sound development. So there's a big range here, and it's going to depend a little bit on different languages, but some of the ones I get asked about is like the R sound. So your child might be saying ka instead of car. That's pretty typical because R is a late sound. R isn't usually mastered until like 6 or 7. Same with L. Light, you might hear white. That's a simplification that's typical because L is a hard sound. TH, you might hear like math instead of math, or mouth instead of mouth, or mouth instead of mouth. Your kids are going to simplify sounds, and there's going to be sort of these typical patterns of sound simplification that we see. Probably a lot of you had young children who, when they started saying water, called it wawa, or when they started saying bottle, they called it a ba, because they simplified it. That's just complex and hard, and they just couldn't make their mouths do what they wanted them to do, so they simplified. And as they get older, we should see these patterns of simplification start to disappear. We don't want to see a child who's 6 saying tootsie instead of cookie, but the child who's 2, totally fine for them to say tootsie instead of cookie. And then I'll just briefly touch on literacy because it is a big aspect of language development. All of these skills, social communication, speech, receptive language, expressive language, go into literacy. And you can see at that bottom there, good understanding and speaking skills. So good receptive language and expressive language are necessary for academic success. Your understanding skills become your reading skills, and your speaking skills become your writing skills. So setting a foundation now in these early years is going to help your children be really successful with literacy skills later on. And just sort of some general milestones for literacy development right now. This is literacy. Having a 6-month-old or a 9-month-old hold a book, that's literacy. Having a 18-month-old turn the pages as you're reading the book to them, that's literacy. As they get a little bit older, maybe recognizing some letters, understanding stories, telling stories, those are all parts of literacy. But you're going to need a strong foundation in your social communication, your expressive language, and your receptive language in particular, and your speech really to be really successful in literacy. Okay, and we're nearing the end, so I will rush a little bit so I save time for questions. How to support your child's language development. Ultimately, like I said from the very beginning, your children are going to learn language through interaction. So the best thing you can do is interact with them, play with them, have fun with them. Talk about the things that your child is paying attention to. Talk about what's in front of you. Talk about what you think your child is thinking about. But then wait, pause. Give your children chances to take their turns. If we're just sitting there and talking, they're not going to have a chance to say what they want to say or to use the words that they have. So give them your undivided attention and play. Let them lead the interaction. Let them play with that toy however they want to play with it, even though in your mind you're like, just put the puzzle piece in the puzzle. Stop doing that with the puzzle piece. Let them do it. Let them do it their way. Talk about what they're doing, because when we model language that's related to what the child's paying attention to and what the child's thinking about, they're going to learn. Just like you or I, we retain things when we're interested in it. If this presentation didn't catch your attention, you're probably not going to really remember much of it. Or you're probably going to walk away with like the 1 or 2 points that really piqued your interest. And that's what you're going to retain from this. Your kids are the same. Say words, model words, and make them fun. And if you can take away one strategy that's really going to help your children learn language, try not to ask them so many questions. Just model, make words fun. Don't test them all the time. Teach them, model those words. So if they're drinking, it's not, oh, are you drinking? It's drinking, you're drinking. If they're pushing a card down the ramp, it's not, what are you doing? What should we do next? What card do you want to play with? It's, car is going down. The car is going down. Wow. If they give you their bottle and you know that they want milk, don't say, oh, do you want milk? Say milk, say milk, say milk. It's kind of annoying. Instead, say, oh, milk. You want milk. Milk. Let's get milk. And they're going to be a lot more likely to retain those words, to care about those words, and to start to say those words. So I've rushed a little bit there, but I do really want to save time for questions. So I'll just quickly show you some of my references, and now it's time for questions. And hopefully if I breezed too quickly through something, we can get to it now with the questions from Christy.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's great that you're sharing your contact information there. So anyone whose questions we don't get to, or if you think of something after the session, you can reach out directly. So our first question is, how should we know the difference between a delay in speaking and being nonverbal due to autism?
Okay, that's a good question. I think it touches on a lot of things. If the child isn't communicating effectively, regardless of what the reason is or the cause for that delay, then there's a delay. So it's not that we necessarily have to say, and maybe this question, I'm missing part of the question, because if you're wondering about like the speech aspect, like forming the sounds versus not using the words because they don't know the words, then again, autism or no autism, you want to see which of the other aspects your child is making progress in. And specifically with autism, because social communication skills can be a really hard aspect or a delayed aspect in kids who have autism, focus on those skills and see that your child is kind of paying attention to you and taking turns with you and looking at you and using joint attention, and setting that strong foundation with their social interaction, their social communication. Give your child also opportunities to send you messages and interpret those messages, even if they're not verbal. If your child is pointing to something, they are telling you something. And that gives me information as a speech pathologist about what they're thinking and what they're capable of and where that delay really is. Because a child, and again, regardless of the diagnosis, if a child's not sending a message in any way with their body or their face or their eyes or their hands, then that shows me something about the kind of delay they're having versus the child who's really, really trying to tell me what they want, but not getting those words out. So in thinking about the question, I would really say, like, let's parse out which aspects of communication are the aspects that you're concerned about. Is it the speech? Is it the language? Is it the social communication? Is it all of it? Is it hard to tell? And I would say we could spend a lot of time answering this question, so I don't want to rush through it because I know that there's probably a lot more information you're looking for right now. But that's where your child's teacher, daycare teachers, can be a great resource. You can check out the app. There's tons of information that's going to help you a lot in understanding the nature of your child's delay and different ways to help them. Speak to your pediatrician about, connecting with a speech pathologist. So I know that doesn't probably clearly answer your question, but I think there's a lot to that kind of question. So yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll do one more question, and then there will be a follow-up email sent to everyone with how you can reach out to Talia and Miriam directly for any further questions. So the next question is, my son is almost 20 months and uses a lot of word approximations. There was over 100 of them when we counted them at 18 months, but he uses much fewer full words. He has used 2-word sentences since 15 months and recently started with 3-word sentences. Should I be concerned about any of this?
So I would say, look back at that slide about the speech, because when you tell me that your child has a big vocabulary of word approximations and that they're putting 2 words together and even 3 words together, also I would say, what are they understanding and how are they interacting? But I think based on the way you phrase that question, I would always say, let's look at their speech. Let's look at the markers for speech development and how that's progressing. How clear should it, I think the child's 20 months now. So you saw by 2 years, the child only needs to be 50% intelligible, 50% clear. So are they meeting that milestone? And then we'll look at the sounds. Do they have those early developing sounds like a ba and a ma and a pa, and a ka and a ga? Do they have lots of different sounds? And the last part I would say to think about is, do they have different sounds and different vowels in lots of different combinations? Are all of their words like ba and ma and pa and da? Or do they have like mommy and baby and uh-oh? So different vowels and different consonant combinations. And if you're saying, I don't know, or I can't tell, I'd say to you, especially, don't ask your child a lot of questions. Instead, be a good speech model. Say the word to them that they just said to you. Exaggerate the correct production and the correct pronunciation. So if they go to you and they say, mo milk, and you're like, I know they just said more milk, but they just didn't say that clearly. You're going to say, oh, more milk, more milk. Let's get some more milk. And I would encourage you to be as animated as you can and get up in their face so they can see what's happening with your mouth, and exaggerate your production and make it fun and really help them tune in to that piece that they weren't pronouncing or the piece that they were dropping off in the word.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Talia and Miriam, for being here today. And thank you to all of our parents for tuning in. We will send a follow-up email how you can reach out to Babbly further, also with a recording of the session if you'd like to go back and rewatch any element of it. Just a reminder for all of Kids and Company parents, we do have a promotion going on with Babbly right now where you can receive 25% off of their coaching programs. So please reach out to your director for details on that promo code and how to redeem if you are interested. And with that, thank you. Thank you again. It was very informative. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.